In this special Independence Day episode, Dr. David K. Bernard shares how Apostolic Pentecostals are being salt and light in the world of politics and government. This episode offers encouragement to any believer who wants to make a difference in the political arena while maintaining their Christian witness. Welcome to Apostolic Life in the 21st Century, a podcast dedicated to helping modern-day believers live out the teachings of the first century church. This podcast is part of the teaching ministry of Dr. David K. Bernard. Dr. Bernard has dedicated his life to studying the Bible and helping believers apply its message to their daily lives. In Apostolic Life in the 21st Century, Dr. Bernard answers your questions about what the Bible teaches and how those teachings apply to everyday life. If you enjoy this podcast, we encourage you to check out Dr. David K. Bernard's books. Dr. Bernard has written more than 30 books on biblical theology and Christian living and leadership. Visit Pentecostalpublishing.com and search David Bernard for a list of available titles. Enter promo code DKB10 at checkout to save 10% on your order. That's Pentecostalpublishing.com, promo code DKB10 to save 10% at checkout. Thank you for joining us. This podcast episode is being released the week of July 4th. So here in the United States, we're going to be celebrating Independence Day. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to discuss how Apostolic Pentecostals are being salt and light in the world of politics and government. This spring, the National Apostolic Christian Leadership Conference held their inaugural summit in Washington, D.C. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to ask you, what is the NACLC? Because I think a lot of people are not familiar with that organization. And what testimonies can you share about the work that that organization is accomplishing?
Yes. The NACLC, the website is naclc.org, so you could go there and get lots of information. It stands for National Apostolic Christian Leadership Conference. The idea is to bring together the Apostolics, United Pentecostals, and others of similar faith. We estimate approximately 4 million constituents in the U.S., to bring them together for common interest and common concerns. So we do not promote political parties or political candidates, but there are things that are very important to us. Number one, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and moral values. So I can give you some important examples of things that we're working on. In some cases, there are lawsuits, and we are asked to join the lawsuit by presenting what's called a friend of the court brief, amici curiae, which that simply means we write a brief saying we support one side because of these reasons. So we've joined a number of those, trying to add our voice along with a number of other conservative Christian groups. So here are the kind of things we're addressing. They're usually related to some aspect of freedom of religion, but some of them are very practical. And some of them are court cases, but also we're working with legislative issues in states, but also the U.S. Congress. If there's a law that we feel could adversely affect churches, then we're trying to meet with legislators to explain our position and explain the support that we have. So, for example, a lawsuit, and these are all recent examples, a lawsuit in Indiana which would say a child decides they want to be transgender, that saying the parents cannot have any say-so in the matter. And so we're supporting parental rights, that parents have to be involved. Another example is donor privacy, where some states are warning if you support any kind of moral values or position, they want to be able to disclose all the donors to churches, for example, for the purpose of attacking them or harassing them. Or just we have Tupelo Children's Mansion, which operates under all state regulations, but there's legislation that will try to nationalize this, where all homes would have to meet some federal criteria, which means things like homosexual rights, transgender rights, you could no longer have Christian values to be an influence in adoptions or placements, things like that. So we're trying to defend our rights there. Another example of Christian colleges, there's a lawsuit where the government, right now they say they're not going to enforce it for religious colleges, but you can't really trust a promise like that. But they tried to pass regulations that colleges would have to, again, respect homosexual and transgender rights. So a Christian college dorm, if someone says I'm homosexual, they can have a right to continue being the student of the Christian college. Or if someone says I'm transgender, I want to go to the opposite sex dorm and live there, then the college would have to accommodate that. So we're kind of fight against those kind of legislation. There's another case we're working with that's trying to deny federal income tax exemption for churches, saying churches should not have the right for an exemption. So these are the kind of issues that we are working with, and in some cases we have been successful in dealing with those. I do, to the larger issue, I don't think the church should support candidates and political parties directly, because we should be open to everyone. We shouldn't send a message that you have to belong to this party or support this candidate or to be accepted among us. No, we want to be a church for Democrats, Republicans, independents, all of the above. However, we want to support religious freedom, and we want to support certain moral values. Now, in a pluralistic society, we recognize that you can't impose all biblical values upon secular people. So, for example, in America, 100 years ago, they tried prohibition to outlaw alcohol as a moral position. Well, that didn't work. It failed. It caused more problems, crime, and so forth. So obviously in America, adultery is legal, fornication is legal, homosexual behavior is legal, transgenderism is legal. So we're not trying to fight the battle that say non-Christians or unbelievers have to follow Christian teachings. We're not trying to impose, Christianity upon everyone. However, it comes to moral values where at what point do you want to defend the life of unborn people? At what point do you want to say minors, it's one thing for an adult to choose a surgery that mutilates part of their body, but should we allow minors, children, to have life-altering permanent hormonal treatment or surgery that will change their whole life? And should we allow that without the parents even being involved? And so obviously we're going to try to defend our values in those contexts where it affects society or it affects individuals. And so I made a list of some of the things, and we don't generally take policy positions because there are nuances there. So as a church, we don't, but we encourage our people to get involved. I think everyone should pray for our government. That's biblical. In Bible times, they weren't living under democracy, so they couldn't really vote. But since we are under democracy, I believe it is our responsibility to have influence. And one way we do that is a vote. So I encourage every Christian to register to vote and to vote for people they think will best fulfill these important principles. And no candidate is perfect. That's why we can't necessarily unreservedly support any candidate, because they may say or do things we disagree with. And so as a church, we have to reserve our influence to speak with moral clarity regarding any situation. Even if it's a candidate that we generally think is doing a good job, if they say or do something contrary to our values, we need to be able to say, that doesn't represent us. We don't agree with that, or that's not the church. So we have to have enough distance to say that. But I think, even in the Bible, we find people getting involved in society in the extent they could. So in the Old Testament, we had people like Esther, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Joseph, all involved in high positions in government. In the New Testament, we had Cornelius, a Roman captain. We had Paul asserted his rights as a Roman citizen, his legal rights as a citizen. You have the Ethiopian eunuch who was a treasurer of his country, which is a pretty notable position. And then also you have an interesting reference Erastus was a church member who held a high political office in Corinth, according to Romans 16:23. It's variously translated. The NIV says the city's director of public works, or the NLT, the city treasurer. So Christians can have influence and positions of influence. They can be in government. Well, that would indicate they could also vote, they could support candidates, and so forth. And so when it comes to us preaching involvement, and when it comes to us choosing involvement or choosing who to vote, here are some of the things that I feel that would be important issues. So freedoms of religion, speech, press, peaceful assembly. We should support those rights because they're fundamental human rights, and also we need them in order for the church to function. Civil rights for everyone, every race and ethnicity. Equal justice under the law for everyone, every race and ethnicity. When we are able to have influence, we will support pro-life positions, and we will support our ability to advocate for pro-life and for our medical personnel to act only in accordance with their conscience, not be forced to violate their own conscience. Protecting the moral stance of churches and Christian institutions. So again, orphanages, children's homes, counseling services, churches, schools, universities, we should be able to, we're not trying to impose our morality on secular people, but we want to preserve our ability to live a moral life according to our own teachings, and for our institutions to uphold our own moral teachings. That's important. And therefore, we want to appoint judges who will uphold our rights and uphold the Constitution as originally written. Of course, we're interested in defending our nation against terrorism and state aggression. Supporting the rule of law, supporting law enforcement officers, of course, with accountability. They're not above the law, but the Bible teaches us to, in Romans 13, also 1 Peter chapter 2, that we should be law-abiding citizens and support the rule of law. That doesn't mean every political decision is correct or every law officer is correct, but the principle of supporting law and order is important for Christians. We support Israel's right to exist. Again, that doesn't mean we have to support every Israeli government or every policy of every Israeli government, but we do support the nation of Israel to exist. Economic freedom and opportunity, including opportunities for minorities and assistance to the poor, improving schools and educational choices, fair and effective immigration policies, that's a big subject, medical and health insurance reforms, less government regulation and more local freedom, reasonable environmental protections, that's a broad thing, and policies to support marriage and families. So the NACC is not going to deal with all those, but we are going to particularly focus on things that are important for our religious freedom and for our churches and other Christian institutions to operate according to our own moral values. So, as I said, in conclusion, we are forging an alliance to support legal cases with the Alliance Defending Freedom and other groups to protect our political rights as Christians, and then also working with legislators to make sure that our rights are protected in any legislations that passed on the state and national levels. And we have seen some success in these endeavors, and it's important for us to pray for our nation and to support these efforts as we're able.
I just have one follow-up question for you, because I'm sure somebody out there is thinking this. You mentioned the friend of the court briefs, and many people are aware of your legal training. Have you had a hand in helping write some of those briefs?
Well, to this point, I haven't actually constructed them, but I am connected to a network that they will send me cases, and I consult with the leaders of the NACC, and we decide which cases we want to make as our priority. So while I don't write them, I do read their briefs and decide whether we think it's something we want to support or not.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Apostolic Life in the 21st Century. If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. We also appreciate it when you share Apostolic Life in the 21st Century with a friend or family member. And make plans to join us again next time as we look at how the Bible applies to everyday life.